This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Anjali Kamat.
We turn now to what the United Nations World Food Programme has called a silent tsunami of hunger. It's been described as the worst food crisis since the 1970s. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization, more than 1 billion people, or 1/6 of the world's population, go hungry every day. Last year alone, 37 countries experienced riots over skyrocketing food prices. But the world's richest nations have slashed their funding for food aid to their lowest levels in 2 decades. The World Food Programme warned this week that more than 40 million people will have their food rations reduced or eliminated because of the drastic aid cuts. According to Josette Sheeran, the head of the World Food Programme, wealthy nations, quote, think the world food crisis is over. But in 80% of countries, food prices are actually higher than 1 year ago.
For more on the food crisis and the related crisis in agriculture, we're joined now by an award-winning Indian journalist, writer, activist, Devinder Sharma. He closely monitors how international agriculture, biotechnology, trade policies negatively impact food security and farming communities in the global south in general, and in India in particular. Trained as an agricultural scientist, he's the author of GATT and India, The Politics of Agriculture, GATT to WTO, Seeds of Despair, and In the Famine Trap. We welcome you to Democracy Now! In the Famine Trap. That's what we're talking about all over the world. Explain what the problem is, the scope of it.
Well, let's be first very clear. There is no shortage of food in the world. We have about 6.7 billion people on the earth, and we produce food for 11.5 billion people. There is no shortage. It's only that one part of the world is eating more and one part of the world is starving. And I think that's a distribution problem, the political problem that we need to address. But then in the process of all this comes the issue of corporate control over food, the speculation that we see through future trading, which drives the prices high. The corporations make money. The poor people are deprived of food. So we see a kind of a nexus operating here. And as the World Food Programme mentioned, that there is a kind of a crisis that we see. The number of hungry is multiplying. But I think what they refrain from saying is that it is because of the kind of agriculture that has been pushed into the world, especially now the developing world, that we are faced with a crisis. In fact, the crisis is going to exacerbate in the days to come. And that is my worry. And I think we are not drawing any lesson from where we have gone wrong.
What do you mean corporate control of food?
Well, if you look at the way the global agriculture is determined now, the emphasis is like look at America, the model of American agriculture. There are less than 1% of your population now is involved with agriculture. So, but America is a big player in international agriculture trade. So when America talks about agriculture, it talks about corporations, big machines, and sophisticated technology, and so on, which is producing food. And essentially, that model is being pushed on to our countries. And the World Trade Organization, the IFIs, and the kind of the business or the hedge funds and so on are actually pushing that model into developing world, which means farmers have to be pushed out of agriculture. That is a new mantra, I would say, globally.
Devinder, can you talk about this new phenomenon that's expanded over the past year, has come to light in the past year, and you call that outsourcing food production. It's been called the global land grab, food pirates. Explain what this is.
Well, I call it as food. I call them as food pirates for a simple reason. It is shocking, and I think we are going back to the days of neocolonialism, because what is happening today is the companies after the 2008 food crisis realize that even if they have money, they will not have food supplies. Especially the Middle East countries, they realized that they had the petrol money from petrol, but no food available off the shelf. So they have now decided to invest so that they can produce food for domestic markets. So there is a scramble all over the world to go to Latin America, to Africa, to Asia, companies and the countries, and also Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. They are all investing the bailout funds to actually get into land grab now. And I see all over the world. Roughly an area equivalent to Germany has already been leased out or purchased outrightly by these companies and these countries.
And they're using this to produce agriculture for whose benefit?
For domestic market. Let me give an example. Ethiopia is one country that we always know is associated with the starvation and hunger. There are 5 million people who live in hunger in Ethiopia. And you'll be surprised, 8,000 companies are vying for buying land in Ethiopia, including 80 from India. And the government of Ethiopia has already agreed that out of the 2.7 million hectares that it wants to make available to these companies, this year they will make available roughly about 1.4 million. Now, that means the governments are in hand in glove. In fact, there is some weeks back, I was invited to a meeting, which of course has got postponed now. The African leaders are collaborating with the Middle East leaders, and they're holding a kind of a conference to see how Africa and the Middle East can come together. From Middle East money, you can buy land and cultivate crops in Africa not for Africa, but for domestic consumptions back home.
Devinder, looking at the United Nations warning of millions of people now facing starvation because the world's wealthiest nations have drastically reduced aid to the UN World Food Program, how does it work? Is it an effective tool? Why have these wealthy countries?
Well, there are two opinions about it. First of all, I would say it's good that aid is getting reduced, because aid actually distorts the practices in the developing countries. Look at India, for instance. If we had gone on with the aid programs, I don't think India would have been self-sufficient in food production. We would have been completely dependent, and that's what the world wants us to be now. I think the opportunity now is to see that Africa, mostly in 30 countries in Africa, are faced with the food crisis. I suppose the emphasis has to be on building up their capacity to produce food, and that can only happen if the aid from this part of the world is reduced effectively. And I personally feel that aid is politically derived. Let's not be forgetting that. Aid distorts the global prices. Aid also distorts the ability of a country to produce food. So I think we should draw a lesson from the food crisis and try to evolve policies which can provide a kind of environment to the farmers within a country, also given the kind of a policy mix, so that countries can produce food within the country. And that, I think, we have to draw a lesson from India and China. We were once written off, if you remember. Both India and China, we thought at least half of India would be led to a slaughterhouse in the end of 70s. But because of the domestic policies, when we closed our borders, didn't allow food imports to come in, then we gave in kind of a right incentive to farmers to produce more, and the rest is history. I think that is what Africa needs to do now, rather than go on depending upon aid, which will, of course, be of interest to these countries, the rich countries.
Devinder, can you describe for our audience the situation for an average Indian farmer? We hear about farmer suicides. As many as nearly 200,000 farmers have committed suicide in the past decade. Yeah. Can you explain this and the impact of American farming subsidies on Indian agriculture?
Well, India is a very sad case now as far as agriculture is concerned. After being a seat of Green Revolution, we are faced with what I would call as a terrible agrarian crisis, the worst that at least we have seen in the living memory. What has happened now is the natural resource base on which the technology was based has been destroyed. And that has created all kinds of problems for the farmers, the entire equation going wrong. In the last 15 years, we have had about 200,000 farmers committing suicide. In fact, it's very tragic that every hour, with 2 farmers commit suicide somewhere in India. Very pathetic scenario. And the government is not at all worried. We have had a number of commissions and so on and so forth, but nobody wants to address the real issues, why the farmers are committing suicide. Now, on the other hand, 40% of farmers want to quit agriculture if given a choice, which means the entire focus, entire effort of the governments all these years have been to really push farmers or to marginalize agriculture. And that is what is now quite visible. And in fact, the government of India, on top of it, has also announced that we would like to transfer a population from the rural to the urban areas in India. And let's not forget, India has 600 million farmers. Every 4th farmer in the world is an Indian, twice the population of America. Now, what do you do with the 600 million farmers? I think the challenge should be how to make agriculture more productive and sustainable and economically viable. But unfortunately, the mainline economic theory is we don't need farmers. The corporations will produce food for us. And that is where as you asked me earlier, the role of corporations is coming in.
We just have 30 seconds, but the message you want to leave our audience with.
Well, 2 things. First of all, the kind of agriculture that we have here, the subsidies especially, if the American farmers want subsidies, please have it. But if you want to trade simultaneously, please don't do it, because your subsidies kill our farmers. And I think the message is, please leave us alone. If you want to trade, you can't have the cake and eat it too. So please keep your subsidies, but don't flood us with cheaper imports. This is what is happening all over the world. The 2 parts of the world, America and the European Union, are becoming the biggest exporters, and developing countries are becoming food importers. And importing food for us is importing unemployment.
Well, Devinder Sharma, we want to thank you very much for being with us, award-winning researcher, journalist, activist. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Shruhoto Kudus, Aaron Mate, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Masood, Ravi Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Peter Curry's our engineer. Special thanks also to Becca Staley, Nicola Hugh Gran, Samantha Shumbley, Jessel Noor, John Gerberg, John Randolph, Kellen Innocent, Travis Collins, Kieran Krug Meadows, Vesta Godars, Rabia Alghani. Our website is democracynow.org. You can read the show, you can listen to it, you can watch it. I'm Amy Goodman with Anjali Kamat. Thanks so much.